I can hear you.
You can hear me?
Oh, yeah.
I think part of it may be related to recording matters, but it doesn't. Whether you think of, I mean, you expressed you articulate.
Wow. Hello.
Welcome to Beirut. No. You articulated a notion of agency that was very connected to, that was almost utilitarian, and certainly voluntary or conscious, purposeful. And so I was wondering whether that kind of completes what you're looking to work through, or whether there's a dimension, and I thought of it also in relation to Koselleck, obviously, that's non-agent, or that's non-conscious or non-voluntary, but that's defined by, and that creates the Adab as a mobilizer of non-conscious, non-voluntary necessarily, and therefore, and yet agented in a certain way, social relations or horizons of expectation and space of experience and the like, as opposed to this is my goal, me, the Niqūlā al-Turk, I want to obtain 2 sacks of grain from the multazim or whatever it is. But a kind of slightly more textured notion of agency, if that makes sense. Thank you.
Yeah.
Maybe there wasn't a question in there either. So I'm not sure if I'm expecting, but just whether agency, think more a little bit about agency.
I paused for a moment, in part because I like pausing, but also because I was trying to decide if I wanted to tell you a story in an attempt to answer your question, and also to make up for the fact that I didn't finish reading my paper, which may have persuaded you that the agency here is very much coming from the intentionality of the poet and the specific social circumstances of his world, as opposed to larger structures. Let's suspend that for a moment. The story is, and I had mentioned it briefly, is that, and it's not clear actually if this is an apocryphal story or a true story, Niqūlā al-Turk either did or was alleged to have become paralyzed. This paralysis was half of his body in Fallaja, and in Bakama lisanuhu, his tongue became paralyzed as well. He was unable to speak. Al-Maqāmā al-Qadiyya was written the same day, according to the scribes, that he learned that some of his sons, these younger men in the diwan, were circulating this rumor about him. It was written feverishly, and then it was given to a messenger to take to these boys and read to them as a reproach. So this is not an economic matter. He's not seeking remuneration. He doesn't want his house, his roof fixed, or an extra bag of grain or wheat. What he wants is to tell these boys, you can't act like this. This is unacceptable. And so the maqāma features the rawi. He's lonely, as usual. He leaves his home. He goes to have an entertaining time listening to some judges discussing cases. As soon as he sits down with the judges, who bursts in but Abu Nawadir, in this case articulating very much what Niqūlā al-Turk is complaining of. He bursts in saying, a bunch of boys have been spreading a rumor that I became paralyzed. What are you going to do about it, judge? Can you help me? The judge says, well, bring them here. There's an exchange of words, there's some anger, and the judge has the 3 boys thrown in jail. One of them is tortured. It's not a pleasant scene. And at the end of that, Abu Nawadir says, okay, I think I feel the return of mercy and my fatherly instincts. Perhaps you could now let them go. And so I had mentioned that this maqāma stages acts of punishment and forgiveness. And the maqāma ends with the father around his metaphorical sons walking away, having once again failed to pay the judge what the judge feels he's owed. However, that's not the point. The point is, this is a social intervention constructed in a very particular social historical moment where the maqāma is being used to rebuke people very much in his world. And so for me, analytically, that aspect of agency, that aspect of intention seems so clear. and the larger macro forces, they fade. Not to say that they're not obviously playing major roles. There's work to be done taking Munayyar's account and Ahmed Haidar al-Shihābi's account and placing their writings about the changing values of wheat, practices of import and export, changing economics, the sanctions placed on various cities, all of these macroeconomic factors together with the really fine-grained stuff that we're finding in these maqāmas. But perhaps that doesn't answer your question. Thumbs up, that's good.
What I find striking about al-Turk is that the beginning of the genre is forgotten, right? He doesn't seem to be, he looked at them as a collection, obviously, right? Because they're different villages, so he perceived this as a collection of maqāmāt. And maqāmāt usually are written in collections, but he did not see himself as an emulator to Hamadani or Hariri, like the beginning of the genre, right? You know, Hariri was very conscious about imitating Hamadani, he mentions that, and several others, Ibn Naqya, the others, right? So, al-Turk was simply writing within the genre, right? This is my impression. Now, what happened in the 19th century, right? Because again, we find with the Shidyaq, for example, or with the Yazji, that the beginning of the genre, they're very conscious about it. Huge. Even Isa ibn Hisham, right? Al-Haris bin Hitham, or they even imitate the narrator or something.
Absolutely.
Like that. And they're connected to this. There are two impressions that I've been hearing ever since I came back to Beirut from the US in the last 5-6 years. Is that, and I started working on the Maqāmāt, right? I wasn't doing that before. Is that al-Yazji revived the genre, right? Not that he was writing within the genre. The second is that these 19th century authors were reviving the genre as a response to this Western narrative, the so-called novel or something being translated into Arabic, and they want to stop that by going back to the roots, right? So, what's your reply to this? Was, for example, Yazji writing also within the genre, or what happened with this, the difference between the 18th and the 19th century of Maqāmāt?
It's a fantastic and central question. One way to think about it is the politics of originality. What is the political value of being perceived as original? Or what is the political value of generating something novel, like Faris al-Shidyaq is attempting to do? And why is that? Why at that particular historical point in the 1850s and 1860s does that become? Why does his subversion and iconoclasm and his desire to break apart genres become associated with something modern? Whereas al-Yazji, who is emulating, he is performing an extremely sophisticated and demanding mu'arada, which has its own established history, is suddenly seen as rote imitation as opposed to emulation. Why is it that in this moment, emulation loses its aesthetic value? It's trumped in a way by this other notion of originality or creativity. I think so. I don't have an answer. Aside from saying that, I wonder if Koselleck, again, is very helpful here in thinking that someone like al-Turk, whose world was not in crisis, who was not, I think, looking out at an ascendant Europe as this decidedly politically dominant force that you have, say, by the late 19th century for that 1 or 2 generations when the Nahda is also quite strong. He wasn't perceiving Adab as in need of a revival. And he wasn't postulating the classical past as something distinct that needs to be returned to. Whereas al-Yazji's whole project is to return to emulate, and perhaps to surpass that world. So perhaps Koselleck's notion that these are different conceptions of the past, and different conceptions of what the future will look like. For al-Yazji, a modern future is a future in which speakers of Arabic are able to once again master the rhetorical capacity that they had lost after, let's say, the fall of Baghdad or at whatever imagined period you want. Al-Turk seems much more located in his own time, in his own moment. He's less self-conscious. And a really nice example of that, again, we didn't have time for it, is that one of the characters in one of these, the dirtier, more profane maqāmas, is al-Fakh, al-Lisan.
Is that what we skipped?
That's what we skipped. I'm so sorry. I can email it to you. Okay. It's also available. It was printed. You can read it. It's quite good. It's very funny and very dirty for those who are interested. So he has a lisp, just like the narrator in Shmookler's Maqāmāt, except the way it works is so different. It is so much more contained. There's basically the adīb and the rawi are hanging out, and this is the maqāma where the adīb has lost his fortune and he has to be teaching in this village. He's not particularly happy about teaching Nahwa and Sarf and whatnot. And to make matters worse, these two boys, both of them are heavy set. One of them is terribly ugly. One of them is awfully inarticulate, and the other is quite eloquent. They come and they say, "We need your help. This guy can't speak properly. Can you fix his tongue?" And so Abu Nawadir, being the reputed amazing literary figure that he is, takes up the task. Apparently, this poor boy switches the zain for a ra, turning. You can begin to imagine. There's 4 different letters that he can't seem to pronounce. The ayn becomes rain. And so Abu Nawadir gives him first a Zainiya and then a Jimiya and so on and so forth. And each time he fails. Each time he fails. So this great figure, he fails to fix the boy's tongue. There's nothing heroic about this particular maqāma. And it ends with Abu Nawadir chewing on the tips of his fingertips in regret. Ya'ud, what is it? Banana Nednan. Sorry about that. Whereas the Shidiyaq, so it's such a contained moment of inarticulateness. Whereas Shidiyaq's Maqāmāt, which deal with this question of being unable to speak properly, it runs throughout the entire thing. It sort of overflows it in a way that we don't have with al-Turk.
Any more questions?
Can I ask one last one? What about the maqāma, the rhyme prose that is not fiction? So when, for example, Shidiyaq is writing a justice al-Qamus and this type of literature, how do you characterize that?
What does fiction mean again?
Yes.
I think the same question could be asked of al-Turk's historical works. Which, so is it something, he's talking about people's boats being hit by cannonballs and people flying through the air. And these are moments of terrible violence that turn into moments of literary presentation. Why? The part of me that's curious about psychology thinks perhaps it's a defense mechanism to fictionalize what he's actually witnessing or hearing reported, because it's quite terrible, in which case Sajjad plays a really active psychological role. But it also suggests that his historical account is partially historical, but that the understanding of the practice of history is not an objective and positivistic approach to the recording of facts. There are other aspects to it, not only differing viewpoints and opinions, like we have an al-Tabari who records many different opinions about, say, the death of Uthman, but also different styles to convey different moments. I think a totally different approach to the same topic would look at it from the perspective of Sajjad and ask at what points is Sajjad used and why, rather than looking at it specifically through the lens of the genre of the maqāma. Because the maqāma here and elsewhere bleeds into so many other forms. It swallows them up and it also spits them out.
Speaking about of Saja, I want to thank you for rhyming the English. Of course, this is the chair of Nasif Ilyazi, right? And I think if you were here with us, he would be happy and would approve of your use of Saja. Okay. Thank you again.